Raising children varies from culture to culture, even from person to person. Can anyone here tell me what your parents passed down to you? Well, some values that my parents passed down to me were frugality and kindness. They learned those values from their parents and from their own life experiences and what they decided to teach my siblings and I. But how children are raised is very dependent based on the culture. Today I'll be talking a little bit about how children are raised in Mexico and Japan and how this affects how they'll grow up, and how the parenting styles are similar and different, and what Mexican and Japanese cultures hold to be the most important values. This is an important topic to study because how a child is raised will affect how they grow up. To understand a culture and to know what values are important to them, one needs to know about which values they hold so highly that they teach their children about it, to ensure that it survives for at least one other generation. So I will be talking a little bit about some cultural dimensions from Hofstede that illuminate the values of Mexico and Japan and some of their similarities and differences when it comes to family life and raising children. Japan and Mexico might seem like two countries that have very little in common, but you, like me, would be surprised to find that they are more similar than one might have thought. The first culture that I will be analyzing will be Japan. This is an ancient culture, and I will first talk about Hofstede's dimensions of Japan, which come from Hofstede's website on cultural dimensions comparing the two countries. This can help describe Japan's culture a little and what they value the most. When it comes to power distance, they are rated a 54. Power distance is defined, according to Hofstede's website, as the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. This means that their score means that they are a borderline hierarchical society. Being aware of hierarchical position is important in social setting, and one should always keep that in mind. However, it is not as hierarchical as some other Asian countries. In addition, Japan is a meritocracy, which means that if someone works hard enough, they can succeed. Another dimension that can tell us a little bit about Japan's culture is masculinity, where they score a 95 out of 100, very high. This very high score means that they find masculine traits like competitiveness, success, and achievement to be the most important in life. This indicates a low score in femininity, whose traits like quality of life, liking what you do, and caring for others are not valued as highly. From a very young age, children learn to compete against each other in groups in Japan, like in sports. The last dimension that I'll be looking at today for Japan is indulgence. This is defined as the extent to which people try to control their desires and impulses based on the way that they were raised, according to Hofstede's website. A society can either be indulgent or restrained based on their score and whether they give in to their wants and desires. Japan has a 42, which is considered low and puts them in the category of restrained. Restrained societies are often pessimistic and cynical. In addition, they don't think that taking time to relax is worth it, and feel that enjoying themselves is kind of wrong. I chose these specific dimensions to touch upon to give everyone a broad idea of what is important in Mexican and in Japanese cultures. And now we'll take a look at the same dimensions in Mexico. Mexico's cultural dimensions information also comes from Hofstede's website on cultural dimensions. In Mexico, their power distance score is 81, which indicates a hierarchical society. Hierarchy is defined as an organization that reflects innate inequalities. Subordinates expect to be told what to do. Centralization is a popular idea, according to Hofstede's website. In Mexico, people understand that there is a place for everyone in society where they belong, and there's no need to explain why that is. Mexico also scored a 69 on masculinity. In countries that score high in this dimension, they tend to be focused on living to work, and there is a strong emphasis on equity and competition. The idea manager is assertive and decisive, and conflicts are often solved by fighting them out. The last dimension is indulgence, where Mexico scored a 97, showing a very high tendency towards indulgence. In indulgent societies, people are typically optimistic and have a positive attitude. Also, this high score shows that Mexicans are more likely to give in to their impulses and desires with the idea of enjoying life and having a good time. Mexicans also believe that it is very important to do what they want to do, have downtime, and spend money as they would like. Now that you've heard a little bit about both countries, I'll talk about the issue that I'm focusing on today, their parenting styles. So I'll be looking at how each culture raises their children. First, I will outline some of the similarities that I found in my research. The first thing that Japan and Mexico have in common is the importance of collectivism. Both countries are considered collectivist and have large power distances, according to the article Face-to-Face Work and Conflicts with Parents and Siblings, a cross-cultural comparison of Germans, Japanese, Mexicans, and U.S. Americans, as well as according to Hofstede's Dimensions website. Seeing as collectivism as an important value of their cultures, it makes sense that it would influence how they choose to parent and raise their children. However, which group is considered the most important? It varies in each country, as I will get into in the differences section. Another similarity is the level of indulgence that parents and teachers have with children. Mexico scored very highly in the indulgence dimension, and while that was not the same for Japan, there is research to indicate that indulging in children is an important value in Japan. In the article, Child Rearing and Educational Practices in the United States and Japan, Comparative Perspectives, the researcher found that Japanese teachers tend to be more tolerant of children misbehaving or being too loud. This contradicts the stereotypical idea of a quiet Japanese school full of obedient children. However, this state of noise and chaos is thought to be the correct way to take care of children in Japan. One teacher was interviewed on the matter and said, "The purpose of preschool is to give children a place to be children. To be a child is to be wild and noisy." In the mind of Japanese teachers, the proper childhood is full of freedom for the child to do as they please. The researcher found that both teachers and parents believe that preschools where children can run wild are crucial for the development of the social person, which will result in the child eventually overcoming their selfishness. For the Japanese, a good child's main characteristic should be conformity, which is said to come from a parent's attention and love. Both cultures show that indulging their children to a certain degree is important. In Mexico, it is important for parents to show affection to their children. In the paper, The Negotiation of Parenting Beliefs by Mexican-American Mothers and Fathers, the level of affection that parents show to their children is often thought about and is crucial when it comes to raising their children. The participants of the research said that it was imperative to not only love their children, but to show that love. This was done through affection, which was defined in the paper as an outward expression of love. The participants talked about how much they valued affection and how important it was to them and their children. This fits with the high indulgence dimension that they scored with Hofstede, because the parents are behaving positively and enjoying life, showing their love the way they want to. The children are benefiting and being made happy by being shown this affection and proof that their parents love them. While the Japanese and Mexicans indulge their children in different ways, there is still a theme of indulgence that runs through the different parenting styles. Nonetheless, there are many differences between the ways that Mexicans and Japanese parents choose to raise their children. One difference is that Mexicans use more expression than Japanese during family conflicts. According to the paper, Face-to-Face Work and Conflicts with Parents and Siblings, a cross-cultural comparison of Germans, Japanese, Mexicans, and U.S. Americans. Conflict is defined as the perceived and or actual incompatibility of values, substantive, or expectations, processes, or outcomes between two or more parties over substantive and or relational issues. In that paper, research in the past has also supported this claim. This may be because in Mexico, the main group in life is the family, according to that paper. It is expected that the individual family members will make sacrifices for the better of the family. And this can lead to conflict within the family. However, in comparison, in Japan, children are taught that the main group in life is the work group. And this leads to Japanese people showing more of their suppressed or pent-up feelings with their family than with their work groups. In addition, The researchers for this paper found that Mexicans value emotional expression during interactions more than the Japanese. Mexicans tend to value spontaneity and passion, while the Japanese do not. The Japanese tend to believe that it is improper to show one's emotions. In interactions with others, especially when talking about disagreeable topics, they value control and restraint of emotions. One other way that Mexicans and Japanese differ is that the Mexicans have a more independent sense of self in regard to respect and disrespect issues than the Japanese. Although they would rather avoid conflicts, Mexicans will stand up for themselves and defend themselves if they think they're being treated unfairly or disrespectfully. The Japanese will tend to be less likely to defend themselves, and they use more face work than the Mexicans do when they're unable to avoid conflict. With these findings in mind, the researchers have put forward the hypothesis that Mexican family members, quote, have a greater self-face concern and use defend and expression more than Japanese family members. While raising children is not directly mentioned in that paper, it can be assumed that when talking about family, that this includes how children are raised and how families operate in these cultures. While they are both collectivist cultures, children are taught differently about which group should be the main group in their lives. Thus, when the children grow up, they react differently to the two groups. Also, Japanese and Mexicans approach emotions in different directions. While the Mexicans value showing emotions and being passionate, Japanese children are taught that to show emotion is unbecoming. Then these families pass down their values to them, and they carry them throughout their lives, creating the cultures that have been studied. Now that I've taken you through some of the dimensions and differences and similarities between parenting styles, now comes the question, why is this important, and what are some of the biggest takeaways from this? Despite both being collectivist countries, which group is more important varies based on the country. In Mexico, the group that is most important is family, while in Japan, the group that is most important is the work family, which I found very interesting and how it influences the way that they raise their children. This key finding is very telling of how the group is looked at in each country and what they teach their children. Another key finding is that both countries are more similar than I thought they would be going into this project. Japan and Mexico put a lot of emphasis on indulgence and collectivism when it comes to raising their children. Given that they are two countries on opposite ends of the earth with very different histories, I would have thought it would be more difficult to find similarities, but it wasn't. Finding these similarities could also help Japan, Mexico, and any other collectivist countries that need to communicate with each other. These similarities can build a bridge between cultures, allowing easier communication between each other. It is also important to compare and contrast these two countries' way of raising children for our individualist countries to learn about collectivist countries. While Japan and Mexico differ greatly, they are both collectivist countries, which influences how they raise their children. Understanding how collectivist cultures compare and contrast from each other and from individualist countries can help them learn from each other and gain a deeper understanding of each other. In conclusion, I talked a little bit today about Japan and Mexico's cultures, how they are similar and different when it comes to raising children, and why this matters. So, I started with some of the dimensions like masculinity, indulgence, and power distance, and how different Mexico and Japan score based on each other. Some of the similarities between Mexico and Japan when it comes to raising children is that they are both collectivist and value indulging their children. Some of the differences are that Mexicans value emotional expression more than the Japanese, and Mexicans are taught that the main group in life is family, while Japanese are taught that the main group in life is the work group. And I believe that it is important to study this topic because you can discover similarities that you didn't know there were. How one raises a child influences how they'll grow up. You can learn that two countries can be collectivist and value different groups, and that when you compare these two countries, it can help them create bridges between each other, and it can help individualist countries understand more about collectivist countries. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that you've learned as much as I have.